Okay, this is Canon Law 2 in continuing semi-exile, and we're in Lesson 2. We've begun it. We're going to do, because of some unforeseen scheduling uh, issues, we're going to do part of it in this video, but not all of the remainder. So we began it in our last class. We'll do a little bit here today, and then we'll save some of the more, I think, challenging things and things that really need our common discussion for. Though everything we discuss here in this video is open for question too, and you habitually have good questions, so just keep them coming. Okay, the last thing we talked about briefly in class, our last class was on Monday, September 14th, was we talked about the ordinary minister of baptism, any cleric, bishop, priest, or deacon. The extraordinary minister, do you know, in the common belief, a lot of people think that any person is the extraordinary minister. But if you look at Canon 861, Section 2, you see that there are actually two different cases, and we discussed these in class, so I'm only mentioning them briefly. One is the ordinary minister is unavailable. So, ordinary minister is not available. Usually the rule of thumb is that means for a month or more. The fact that you have to wait a week or two for baptism, that's standing alone is not probably going to be considered unavailability. So we're probably thinking about something, you really are not going to have access to a minister for a month or more. That's the first case. And in that situation, a catechist can baptize, or another person designated by the local ordinary. So again, the ordinary is usually the bishop, but also could be the vicar general, could be the episcopal vicar. That's our first case of extraordinary ministers. Our second case is the one we all know about: necessity, the dying baby, the dying person in the car crash. And in the case of necessity, anyone can baptize. These two situations are both dealt with in the same canon, which is 861, Section 2, but they're really two cases, and that is not all that clear from Woodall. He deals with this on 255, so I know I'm repeating what we said in class, but I think it's important. There you have it. Okay, let's talk more about necessity, though. Again, our second situation of a extraordinary minister. True case of necessity. Usually this is going to be danger of death, but Hewells tells us there are other situations that could be considered necessity, such as you're in a situation of religious persecution, or even, at least in Hewells' opinion, serious family disagreement about the baptism. Okay, keep in mind Hewells is an authority, so it's fine to rely on him and to take his position, but he's not the law. So if you're in this situation where you're deciding what to do, you still may want to call the chancery and say, I know of this authority here commenting on the law who says urgent necessity includes serious family disagreement, but is that something that, say the judicial vicar or the vicar general has an opinion on? So even with esteemed people commenting on the law, it's great to have their opinions, but they are comments. They are someone's opinions. Okay, case of necessity. What we want to remember, and Woodall covers this on 256 and 262. What's different in cases of necessity? A lot is different. One, the minister potentially is different. It could be not only not a cleric, but perhaps not even a baptized person. So here are the big thing we think of as what's different in case of necessity is the different minister, but there's other things that are different too. One is the liturgical books. Normally we would be following the liturgical books. Not in case of necessity. We don't have the liturgical books in the hospital where the baby's dying, in the car crash where the trucker is dying, etc. And even the canon 850 says follow the liturgical books, but not required in case of necessity. So that same canon deals both with just because baptism is so important, in case of necessity so important. What's our next thing? The water. Still have to use water, but it does not have to be blessed. You could still validly baptize in case of necessity with the water being unblessed. Makes sense. If we're using an extraordinary minister, there's no one to bless the water, so it makes sense where we can baptize with unblessed water. And the sacraments are to take place in a sacred place normally, usually a church or oratory. Again, in the case of necessity, not going to be possible. And normally when you baptize, of course, pour the water 3 times, 3 infusions. But for validity, 1 infusion would be enough. If you can do 3, you should do 3, but 1 would be enough. Okay, case of necessity. By the way, in we said there are 2 situations where there's an extraordinary minister. Presumably in the first situation where there's no ordinary minister, but it's not a death situation, it's not a urgent necessity, you do follow the liturgical books. It's not case of necessity. What about blessing the water? If you look at the rite of baptism, at least the rite of baptism of children, there is a provision for the catechist actually to bless the water. Hewell cites this, if you have his book, The Pastoral Companion, 5th edition, on page 40. But I found another authority, William Westman, also a very very good authority, who says the same thing. Okay. Needless to say, teaching the faithful to baptize in case of emergency, and we may even discuss this in class, is it is important. I mean, in catechism class, when the children study the sacraments, they should be taught how to baptize in case of emergency. Okay, our next kind of big section in Woodall is matter and form. I think recently in one of these videos we talked about matter and form. Maybe at the end I'll review it so that you can stop watching if you're sick of matter and form, but if you would like a review, again, you'll have it. But anyway, what we're told is what's to be used is true water. People ask, what is true water? It's basically water in the common estimation. So melted snow would be fine. Distilled water would be fine. Chemically produced water would be okay. What would not be okay? Sweat, saliva, beer, things that nobody really considers water. Again, remember our rule is pretty democratic. In the common estimation, what do people think of as water? The old code talked about true and natural water. So one of the reasons that we say true water now is just to make it simpler and not to cause scruples among the ministers. A student last year brought up in a situation in a desert country where if water's not available, they sometimes attempt to baptize with sand, S-A-N-D. I don't think that could possibly be valid in any way. Nobody considers sand to be water in the common estimation, so it seems to me it must be entirely invalid. Okay, what about this? You're baptizing an adult woman with very full hair, very thick hair. The water flows on her hair. You pour it, and it flows down her hair and then onto either back in the font or onto the floor, but never touches the skin of her head. Has she been baptized validly? I can't really answer that question, but I can tell you I have seen authorities who say it is invalid. So you do not want to give the faithful cause to doubt. So be sure that the water touches the forehead. Get that water on the forehead. Can get on the hair, okay, that's fine too, but get some on the forehead. Not usually a problem for a baby, but it can be. Even some babies have a good head of hair going on them, but especially for adults, and probably more commonly for adult women, but not exclusively. We've talked about Mormon baptism. If you have any questions, we're going to mention it briefly again in a moment. If you have any questions, we can discuss them. Okay, then Woodall goes into adult and infant baptism. And he makes this interesting point, which I think you know, but it's interesting to emphasize because it's sort of an unusual situation, which is that, as you know, infant baptism is the more common situation. And one of you just the other day brought up the canon that requires infant baptism. We're not supposed to wait. And yet, Woodall tells us adult baptism is considered the canonical and liturgical norm. So we've got this sort of strange situation where we're considering kind of the norm to be what in fact is the less common practice. And of course, when we say it's the norm, what do we mean? In that situation, we've got the sacraments administered in kind of in the traditional order. So this is something that can be kind of a struggle in explaining the sacraments or the order of initiation. I personally, I think that that's more of a concern with kind of professionals in the church, liturgists, clergy, canonists. I don't know that actual faithful get all that upset about it, about the order of the sacraments. Maybe they do, but I just haven't seen a great deal of concern about that in my experience. So okay. As you know, Vatican II restored the catechumenate, and Woodall discusses this on 258. And this does what we're talking about with adult baptism. It restores, for adults at least, the kind of the link among the three sacraments, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. That is the three sacraments of initiation, but also has them in the original order. Woodall sort of gives us the stages of the catechumenate. I had a student a couple years ago who was very involved with RCIA kind of complain about Woodall and say his description was not entirely correct. If you want one that's more accurate, you can look in the Hewell's book, Pastoral Companion, at page 44. Woodall's not way far off, but I'll put up the stages if you want them to have in your notes. I don't think this is something I'd put on the quiz or anything, but it is good to know. So the catechumenate begins with evangelization, and the pre-catechumenate, which that first phase begins with enquiry, and it lasts to enrollment. The next stage is the catechumenate that lasts from enrollment to election. Then we have the period of purification and enlightenment, which we associate with Lenten preparation. And you have catechesis there, and also some rites, and that goes from election to actual baptism, which is the next phase two, sort of phase four, these sacraments of initiation: baptism, confirmation, Eucharist. And then hopefully after that, things are not finished, but we have post-baptismal catechesis, or mystagogy, mystagogy, mystagogy. Okay, so there you have the phases, or stages, if you want them. I think more accurately than Woodall has them. Again, I don't think you need to get totally bent out of shape about Woodall, but we could be a little more accurate. One very important thing with adult baptism is that when you're bringing somebody in, or whoever is doing it, you have to be sure that the person is not misled, because they're embracing the faith. If there's parts of the faith, now that doesn't mean they understand everything perfectly, none of us does, but if they have real reservations about whatever, but a common one might be about Our Lady, might be about the authority of the Holy Father, and obviously about the Church's moral teaching, especially on human sexuality, any of these things, again, we're not telling a person no, but maybe additional prayer, additional time is necessary, but you most certainly do not want to mislead people about the content of the. And as a pastor, you also don't want to allow the people in your administration to do that either. Okay. Okay, what about catechumens? Are they actually persons in the church? Well, you may remember from Canon Law 1, what makes you a person is baptism, a person in the church. And they're not baptized. So no, they are not persons in the church, and yet it's clear there's something different about catechumens. So if a catechumen dies, they're entitled to full funeral rites, as if they had been baptized. And the same if they're married; they're entitled to a church wedding, as if they were Catholic. And so they're not a person in the church. They don't have all the rights of the baptized, but they're analogous to baptized persons in many ways. Woodall has a nice point on 259 about the origin of rites. The rites of the baptized come from Christ. We've got those, you'll remember from Canon Law 1, in the sacraments. They're inherent there. The rites of catechumens, that's something the church has developed. So the church has exercised her special care. And so what we know about the rites of catechumens is something developed by the church. We don't have it directly from Christ. Okay, here's an area we're going to just mention now but not discuss now. Woodall says, kind of mysteriously, at 259 and 260, that there are delicate cases concerning baptism and marriage, and that you have to be careful. Sometimes some people who are in a difficult marriage situation, you do not want to baptize them yet. You could mess up their marriage case. We'll talk about that either in class or when we get to marriage. It is something to keep an eye on, but we don't need to. If we're going to go into it, it helps to look at an example. So we'd want to have that on the board. So just kind of put a pin on that. Infant baptism we're going to discuss mostly in class. Keep in mind that for the purpose of baptism, an infant is someone under 7. So not yet reached the age of 7. If they have reached the age of 7, then for purposes of baptism, they're considered an adult. Again, you may remember that there's a different arrangement. Generally, we usually don't consider someone an adult till age 18, though we have different uh, we have different adjustments for different areas. Marriage might be different in some ways. We might let someone marry even a little earlier than 18, and penal law. 16 is considered about adulthood in most cases, uh, other than for the area of sexual abuse. But in baptism, you're an adult after, so you're treated as an adult. You're obviously not really an adult, but otherwise we would need a whole different rite or something for people who are minors, not still infants, but not yet adults. So we'll talk more about infants and our kind of our big. We're going to talk a little more about infants today, but our big question is, when are there situations in which you do not baptize an infant, or in which you delay or defer baptism? Very, very important question, especially in our time. You've got some articles about that, about baptizing the children being raised by same-sex couples. We want to discuss that in class. That's an important issue and also a delicate one. Okay, but a couple more things about infant baptism naming. Um, what about the name Madison? Is Madison a proper name? Woodall says that on 261 that you should not use a name that is simply popular or fashionable. I think that's good advice. I think that's good advice. But he's a little more restrictive than the actual canon is. The canon, which is 855, says only that the name must not be foreign to Christian sensibility. So it doesn't have to be a saint's name, but it can't be an offensive, a name that's offensive to Christianity. Lucifer, for example, would not be the name. You would not baptize a child. Lucifer, Beelzebub, Pontius Pilate, these types of things. But names that are not saints' names, but there's nothing anti-Christian about them. Carson, Brent, Madison, things like that. Bailey, those names are fine. It sounds like Woodall disapproves, and he does remind us that we have a very good tradition of choosing saints' names, but what the canon actually requires is just that it's something that's not of a it's not a name against Christian sensibility. You're welcome to agree with Woodall, but keep that in mind when you're counseling people. You can give them a suggestion, but I don't think you want to impose on them if they say no. But we want the name Carson. I think if they just you can't reach agreement, I think they should be permitted to use that name. Okay, sponsors. This is important, and hint, it's easy to test on, so perk up your ears. Sponsors, this is quite easy, but it's sometimes people go on what they've actually seen happen, and they may not have thought about exactly what the law requires. Who may be sponsors? This is Canon 873 and 874, and here are your options. You've got a child or something. Who are your options for sponsors? Okay, you can have one confirmed Catholic man. That would be fine. All you need is one. You only need one sponsor. You can have one confirmed Catholic man as your sponsor, and you're fine. Also, though, he has to have no penalty against him and be a person who leads a Christian life, practices the faith. Or you don't know any good Catholic men, so you take one confirmed Catholic woman. That's fine too. Just she alone is fine. That's all you need for your sponsor. One confirmed Catholic man, or one confirmed Catholic woman, or one of each. Could have one of each, and as you know, often it's a married couple who married Catholic couple who are uh, sponsors or godparents, so that's fine too. So one man, one woman, um, or one of each, and then you would have two sponsors, two godparents, but not mom or dad. The sponsors cannot be the mother or father, and as we just said, they have to be confirmed Catholic, a man or woman, no penalty against them, and they must lead a Christian life. Also, they must be 16 years old. That can be waived, though. The pastor uh, could allow a lower age. Interestingly, the canon doesn't say how much lower you could go. It seems to me like the intention would be not to go a whole lot lower. If you think of the responsibilities of of the um, of the godparent or sponsor, yeah, you can imagine a 14 or 15-year-old fulfilling those, but you get a lot below that. It's not too easy to imagine a whole lot of 11-year-olds fulfilling that. And I think there may be some guidance in some places of allowing that kind of waiver for just 1 year, just for a 15-year-old. Okay, just one more thing we want to talk about today, and we already have talked about it, which is conditional baptism. Woodall discusses this a number of places: 249, 253, 263, and 265. We've talked about Mormon baptism and the issue of conditional baptism there. In in uh, in what we do now, if there's a possibility of the baptism being invalid, the code requires an investigation and an inquiry. And the two canons on this are 845 section 2 and 869. That's not all that different than the old code, even though it's sometimes contrasted. The old code also required an investigation, but in the old code kind of presumed invalidity, and then you'd have an investigation that would need to demonstrate validity. We've kind of flipped that now, so that we're presuming validity, especially if it's a community, Lutherans, Presbyterians, known to have valid baptism, and only if there's a reason to doubt that. Yeah, the community has valid baptism, but this preacher who baptized me had a reputation for not following the Trinitarian formula, something like that. So the investigation might disclose that. Um, and really the last thing you need to know is the formula. And I think we've talked about this in class, but I just want to give it to you in writing. This is Woodall in 253. If you have to baptize conditionally, on condition that you have never been baptized, I baptize you, Andrew, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. So that's how you normally would do it if you have a conditional baptism of someone who was maybe baptized Mormon or, again, baptized Presbyterian, but under doubtful circumstances. However, Woodall talks about another type of conditional baptism, and this is where you may be baptizing a dying baby, a dying person, or a person who they can't communicate, so you don't know if they're alive or dead, but you're baptizing them. And so here, this is a different type of conditional baptism, and we have a different formula. And then we have from Woodall on 263, 264, on condition that you are alive, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. You don't need to give the name, so you wouldn't necessarily have a name to give. And if it's the person in a car accident, you wouldn't know his name. Okay, that's the end. We're done. I'm going to go just for those who just love matter and form and want a refresher on that. If you don't, then just turn this off. If you want the refresher on matter and form, here we go again. Remember, we're talking about Aristotle's four causes of a thing. How do we understand a thing? We look at its four causes. Its material cause, what it's made of. Its formal cause, its real essence. It's the essence of the thing. Its efficient cause, who makes it, what's capable of making it. And its final cause, what's the purpose of this thing? So our great example is the loaf of bread, because it's so easy um, to use. What's the matter? What do you need? You're not going to have bread if you don't have this thing. Wheat or wheat dough. Probably wheat dough is what we would say. Dough made of wheat flour. What's the form? We usually just say breadness. Breadness. The essence of bread. What makes one thing bread rather than a cookie, rather than a graham cracker, rather than a pizza? It's breadness, the idea you can tell when somebody forms a loaf of bread. Yeah, that's bread. Nobody would call that a cookie. So just breadness, kind of the idea of bread. The efficient cause, a baker or somebody else who's just a private baker or somebody at home who knows how to make bread. And the final cause of bread, of course, is nourishment and also enjoyment, we could say. But for the sacraments, what's matter and form? The matter is usually going to be the sign, the action taking place. So in baptism, that's going to be the pouring of water. I should say also the washing of water. When we were talking earlier about what baptism is and about pouring of the water, baptism it's called a true washing. It's a washing. And the form is the words, the Trinitarian formula. That's the form. That's what makes this not a bath. This isn't a bath. This is a baptism. It's not. I'm not bathing the child. I'm baptizing the child because I'm using these words. Even though the action might look similar, when I have these words, it gives a new form. It makes it a different thing. Just as with the bread dough, we don't have to make. We have wheat dough. We don't have to make bread out of it. We could smash it down and make pizza crust. We could maybe make cookies out of it. I don't know if there are wheat cookies. There probably are, but you could make something other. You could make something other than. You could make crackers out of it. Really, maybe not if you have yeast in it already, but you could make something other than bread out of wheat dough. You're not condemned to make bread because you have wheat dough, and the same with the water. So we need the form. We need the thing that's going to organize it. And with bread, it's the idea of breadness, and with baptism, it's going to be the words and the intention too. Okay, thank you very much.